Imagine you're sitting in a quiet room, where every second feels heavier than the last. The clock ticks, loud in the silence, and time seems to stretch, as if it's holding its breath. In front of you sits a woman who looks like she could be anyone's grandmother. Betty Lou Beets, 62 years old, with 5 children, 9 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren. She could be someone you'd see at a family picnic or baking cookies in a cozy kitchen. A woman who seemed like she had lived a simple, loving life. But today, Betty Lou Beets is about to become only the second woman in Texas to be executed since the death penalty was reinstated. The strangest part? She doesn't seem afraid. No tears. No desperate pleas for mercy. Just a quiet smile, as if she's about to sit down for a cup of tea. There's no sign of the fear you might expect from someone in her position. And for a moment, you have to wonder, how did she get here? How did a woman who seemed so ordinary, so unassuming, end up moments away from facing the death penalty? Before we get into Betty's story, take a second to hit that like button if you're already feeling the weight of what's to come. It helps support the channel and allows us to bring you more deep, real stories like this one, ones that reveal the truth behind what the world often overlooks. Betty Lou Beets wasn't just a grandmother. She was a killer, someone who, for over 20 years, buried her husbands in her backyard while collecting their life insurance money and playing the role of the grieving widow. But what could possibly make a woman do such things? What was it that pushed Betty from a simple life to one of cold, calculated murder? To understand Betty Lou Beets' story, we need to look back. Back to 1983, to a warm, quiet evening at her home by Cedar Creek Lake. Betty, her 5th husband, Jimmy Don Beets, and her son, Robert Branson, were all in the house. On the surface, it seemed like just another ordinary night. But it wasn't. That night, Betty made a decision that would change everything. She turned to her son and, without any emotion in her voice, said, "I'm done with Jimmy. I can't do this anymore." Robert thought she was talking about divorce. He was wrong. Betty wasn't thinking about ending the marriage, she was thinking about ending Jimmy's life. She looked him dead in the eye and said, "Jimmy has to die tonight." Just like that. No hesitation. No crying. No anger. Just a quiet, unsettling calm. Robert walked out of the house that night, unaware that when he returned just hours later, his stepfather would be dead in the recliner, shot twice in the head. What's your reaction to this so far? Do you think Betty's actions came from years of trauma, or was she just a cold-blooded killer from the start? Leave a comment below, we'd love to know your thoughts on this deeply troubling case. Betty Lou Beets didn't panic. In the hours after Jimmy Don Beets was shot and killed, she remained shockingly calm. She didn't cry, didn't scream, and didn't even try to hide what she had done. Instead, she calmly told her son, Robert, that they needed to dispose of the body. Together, they moved Jimmy's lifeless body from the living room where he had been shot in his recliner to the backyard. There, Betty had already chosen where to bury him, a spot that seemed innocuous enough, just outside her kitchen window. They buried Jimmy in a makeshift grave, inside a decorative wishing well, one that Betty and her son had built just months before. It wasn't an actual well, just a brick-lined pit meant to add charm to the garden. But now, it would become the final resting place of a man who had been tricked into trusting Betty completely. After wrapping his body in plastic, they sealed the well with concrete, covering the evidence beneath layers of stone and mortar. The next morning, Betty went through the motions, just as she had planned. She drove to the marina where Jimmy's fishing boat was docked, crushing his heart medication and scattering it across the boat's deck. She hoped it would make the scene look like an accident. Robert, in an attempt to make the scene even more believable, removed the boat's propeller, again adding to the illusion of mechanical failure. After that, Betty called the police to report that her husband had gone fishing and never returned. For weeks, Betty played the part of the concerned widow. She acted as if she were devastated by the loss, while investigators combed the lake in search of Jimmy's body. Rescuers were deployed, and the lake was dragged, but there was no sign of Jimmy. As the days passed, Betty seemed to grow more and more at ease, as if her role was merely a waiting game, like the others before it. Meanwhile, Jimmy's body remained buried in the backyard, only yards away from where Betty carried on with her daily life. She continued to receive sympathy from neighbors, friends, and even police, while the body of her fifth husband lay just beneath the ground outside her home. But nothing stays hidden forever. What do you think? How did Betty manage to keep the charade going for so long? Was it really the perfect crime, or did she make a mistake somewhere along the way? Let us know what you think in the comments below, and keep watching as we uncover how this chilling story unfolded. The weeks passed, and Betty Lou Beets carried on with her life, playing the role of the grieving widow to perfection. She never showed signs of guilt, not even a hint of remorse. The police continued to search the lake for Jimmy's body, and at some points, they even involved dive teams, helicopter searches, and rescue dogs. But Betty's careful planning ensured that no trace of him would ever be found in that water. The well, concealed beneath the thick layer of concrete, was untouched, and the truth was buried along with Jimmy. But as the search continued, cracks in Betty's story began to show. It was subtle at first, small things that didn't seem to add up. One of the first signs was when Betty seemed more concerned about life insurance and pension benefits than the search for her missing husband. She asked the fire department chaplain who came to console her about what she would receive in terms of financial compensation. She showed little interest in the actual search for her husband, but plenty of concern about what she might inherit. It was a red flag, but it wasn't enough to raise suspicion just yet. Betty's ability to remain composed under pressure had always been impressive, almost chilling. She continued to play her role with perfection, maintaining the image of a grieving widow. But behind the scenes, she knew exactly what she had done, and she wasn't done yet. Betty, a woman who had already killed multiple husbands, knew how to cover her tracks. She had perfected the act of being the helpless widow, fooling not only the authorities but also her own children. As days turned to weeks, the story of Jimmy's disappearance began to fade from the news, and the investigation slowed. The authorities had no body, no witnesses, and no obvious motive to suspect Betty. She had done what she did best: manipulate the truth, create the illusion of loss, and avoid suspicion. But there was something about her actions that seemed off to the police. Her calm demeanor, her ability to answer questions without hesitation, her detachment, all of it didn't sit right with some of the officers involved in the case. Then, on March 5, 1985, a key moment in the investigation changed everything. A tip came in. It was an anonymous phone call that seemed to come out of nowhere, but it was too specific for the police to ignore. The caller claimed that Jimmy hadn't drowned in the lake at all, but had been murdered. And, as chilling as it sounded, they named Betty Lou Beets as the person responsible for his death. The information was detailed, mentioning aspects of the crime that only someone close to the scene could know. The police couldn't dismiss it. They were forced to take another look at the case. But by then, Betty had already returned to her normal routine. She had buried the past with her husband's body, and no one suspected her, until now. The police decided to search her property. They began with the backyard, the area that Betty had so carefully kept hidden. Betty was there, watching from a distance, as the investigators started digging. At first, she remained calm, just like before. But as they dug deeper, her nerves began to fray. She knew what was buried beneath that concrete: Jimmy Don Beets' body, carefully wrapped and sealed in a grave she had made with her own hands. The digging took hours, but eventually, the police hit something solid. They cracked through the concrete, and the moment they did, the reality of Betty's actions was exposed. Jimmy Don Beets' body was found in the well, just as the tipster had said. The forensic evidence confirmed what they already suspected: he had been shot twice in the head, and he had been buried in the backyard. Betty watched as the authorities uncovered the body. For a moment, it seemed as though she might break down, but she didn't. She remained composed, almost detached, as if what was happening wasn't the end of her world, but just another chapter in a twisted game she had been playing all along. But there was more to come. Behind the garage, under a pile of old debris, investigators began digging again. This time, they found another body. It was 𝗕𝗲𝗶𝗺𝗁, Betty's fourth husband, who had mysteriously disappeared in 1981. The body was in a much worse state of decomposition, but the cause of death was clear: a bullet wound to the head, just like Jimmy. The authorities now knew they were dealing with a serial killer, not just a grieving widow. Betty Lou Beets had been burying her husbands for years, and no one had suspected her until now. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. Betty had been using her marriages to collect money, each husband an unfortunate pawn in a twisted scheme to secure her future. And the further the investigation went, the more they uncovered. They found the .38 caliber pistol that Betty had used to kill both men. Ballistics tests confirmed that it was the same gun used to kill Jimmy Don Beets and 𝗕𝗲𝗶𝗺𝗁. The evidence was stacking up, but it was Betty's own son, Robert, who would be the final piece of the puzzle. Robert had always been close to his mother, but now, with everything out in the open, he couldn't deny the truth any longer. He came forward with his testimony, detailing how Betty had told him, coldly and without emotion, that she was going to kill Jimmy. Robert even helped her bury the body in the wishing well, just as he had helped her bury 𝗕𝗲𝗶𝗺𝗁 years earlier. When Robert spoke, it was the moment that sealed Betty's fate. She could no longer hide behind the mask of the grieving widow. Her own son had turned against her, and the truth about what she had done was too much for anyone to ignore. How do you think Betty was able to hide the truth for so long? Do you think she was too confident in her deception, or was she just a master manipulator? Share your thoughts in the comments below. This case is far from over. Betty Lou Beets was arrested on June 8, 1985. Her arrest marked the end of a long and methodical killing spree that had lasted over 20 years. As investigators pieced together her history, it became clear that Betty was not just a grieving widow, but a woman who had used her husbands as stepping stones to get the money she craved. The case against her was overwhelming. 2 bodies had been found, both killed in the same way, both buried in her backyard. The gun used to murder them was traced back to her possession. The evidence was irrefutable, but the question remained: how could someone like Betty Lou Beets, who appeared so ordinary, commit such horrific crimes? The trial began in the summer of 1985. Betty, facing 2 counts of murder, entered her plea, not guilty. Her defense team didn't claim she was innocent. There was too much evidence for that. Instead, they turned to a strategy that would later prove to be a desperate move. They tried to paint Betty as a victim. They argued that years of abuse, both physical and emotional, had pushed her to kill. They claimed she had been battered, emotionally broken, and driven to commit these acts out of a need for survival. But the prosecution was relentless. They painted Betty not as a victim, but as a predator who had spent years manipulating everyone around her, playing the part of the grieving widow while collecting life insurance money. They showed the jury the coldness in her actions, how she had calmly planned the deaths of her husbands, buried them without remorse, and then played the role of the concerned spouse. Betty wasn't a victim. She was a cold-blooded murderer who used the facade of a caring woman to get what she wanted. The trial was long, and the evidence was damning. Betty's son, Robert, took the stand and testified against her. He spoke about how Betty had told him, without hesitation, that she was going to kill Jimmy. He described how they had buried the body together in the wishing well. His testimony was heart-wrenching, not just because of the details, but because of the pain of a son who had helped his mother conceal her crimes. In the end, the jury found Betty Lou Beets guilty of capital murder. On October 14, 1985, she was sentenced to death. It was a moment that shocked everyone who had known Betty, but it wasn't just about the justice for her victims, it was about what her case represented, the hidden darkness behind an ordinary, seemingly harmless woman. Betty's case became a symbol of the dangers of underestimating those who appear to be just like everyone else. Betty Lou Beets spent the next 15 years on death row, and during that time, she continued to appeal her conviction. She claimed her trial was unfair, that her lawyers were incompetent, and that evidence of her abuse should have been presented to the jury. But with each appeal, her requests were denied. In 1988, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals overturned her conviction, arguing that insurance money didn't count as remuneration under Texas law. But this decision didn't last long. Just a year later, the court reversed its ruling, and Betty was back on death row. As the years went on, Betty continued to fight, but she was running out of options. In 1999, her final appeals were exhausted. She had no more chances. Her execution was scheduled for November 8, 2000, but once again, she was granted a stay. Another execution date was set for December 6, 2000, but that too was delayed. With each delay, it seemed like Betty might escape justice, but the authorities were determined to carry out the sentence. Finally, on February 24, 2000, after 15 years of legal battles, Betty Lou Beets was set to die. She was transferred to the Huntsville unit in Texas, the site of many executions. This time, there would be no more stays. There would be no more appeals. Her time had come. As the day of her execution drew near, Betty was offered a final meal, a tradition for those about to face execution. She declined. She didn't want anything. It was a final moment that showed just how detached she had become from everything around her. When asked if she had any last words, Betty remained silent. No apologies. No remorse. Just silence. At 6:18 p.m., Betty Lou Beets was strapped to the gurney, ready to receive the lethal injection. As the drugs began to flow into her veins, she offered a small smile to her attorney and her pastor. Then came two sharp coughs, a gasp for air, and then, nothing. Betty Lou Beets was pronounced dead at 6:18 p.m., the same time she had been convicted for the murder of her husbands. She was 62 years old. Betty left behind 5 children, 9 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren, but she also left behind a legacy of darkness. Her case raised difficult questions that still divide people today. Was Betty Lou Beets a victim of her circumstances? Was she shaped by years of abuse and trauma? Or was she simply a cold, calculating killer, using her circumstances to justify her actions? Was justice served? Or did Betty's execution, after years of appeals and delays, finally mark the end of a tragedy that began long before the first husband disappeared? Betty Lou Beets is remembered as one of the few women in U.S. history to be executed for murder. Her case remains a reminder that sometimes, the most ordinary-looking people can hide the darkest secrets. Was justice truly served? Was Betty Lou Beets a victim, or was she a cold-blooded killer who used her trauma to justify her actions? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more true crime cases that challenge our understanding of justice, human nature, and the complexities of the human mind.